What in the absolute... You know what? Screw it. We'll just make a new show. I'm getting really, really tired of that one anyway. Looks like this Tell's even showing. Oh yeah, Tell, he's showing up in frame.
He has thoughts.
Tell says hello. What's up, guys? Welcome to We Chose Violence. You may wonder why I didn't say RNC Watch TV. It's because we're killing RNC Watch TV. Instead, we're doing a slightly different format where we basically talk about whatever we want to talk about each week, and we don't have to basically find our way to that subject by watching TV shows and finding related experiences. But
we love TV.
We do love TV.
I love TV. You tolerate TV.
I do love some TV. Mostly Star Trek, if I'm being honest, but do love some TV.
But we just, I don't know. I was just like, listen, I don't think this is working. I think we either need to kill it. I suggested killing it. Rob was like, no, I want to do something besides our... So basically we have our Housing for Huntsville podcast, and that's our work podcast. So this is kind of our fun play podcast.
Yeah, and we had been talking about doing a different, or an additional podcast for a while that was just going to be way more freeform, allowed us to talk about whatever we were feeling at the time. And so it kind of made sense to, instead of killing off RNC entirely, just repurpose the channel and go in a different direction. And I think this format's going to work out way better because... we don't feel compelled to watch TV, so we have stuff to talk about. And it's like right now, we're watching Frasier. If we had recorded an RNC Watch TV, this would have been the third or fourth week of Frasier. And it's like, we want to watch Frasier because it's like a nice, comforting way to end the evening. But it was getting kind of weird having to either keep talking about it or go out of our way to watch something else to just have something to talk about. So...
Yeah, I don't have 15 minutes worth of stuff to say about the Frasier we've watched. I mean, I could probably do it if I needed to, but...
It would feel forced.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be fun anymore.
I wasn't looking forward to it.
Yeah, and
It is not making us any money, and it's not setting the world on fire, so if it's not fun, we really need to not be doing it.
Yeah. And so... Yeah, I'm kind of excited about this format change. I feel like we can be... I guess more authentic is one word that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I talk a lot in the housing podcast, and that's fine. That's good. I think people really like it when you kind of play the everyman and ask me questions that the audience is probably going to have.
I feel like I'm getting better at doing that, but I'm still at that point the everyman in that role. It's not
a stretch for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to pretend to not know the answers. But you're also producing, and that's a lot. So we had someone tell us our audio was better than NPR.
I was so happy.
And that person, as far as I can tell, didn't want anything from us. So I don't know if that's accurate. But anyway, we're going to roll with it. We don't get NPR quality audio without effort. So you are busy when you're doing these podcasts. But I was just like, okay, so you want to do a different format. What would you want to talk about? And because I don't want to be talking the whole time. I mean, I do love to talk, but at least in theory, I want you to talk. And you started talking about some topics, and then you talked about one topic that I thought was really interesting. And this is definitely in the realm of fun, and it's definitely... even in the realm of things to watch. So it's not a huge departure from what we've been doing. And what you talked about was pornography.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think this was going to be what we shot the first episode on.
No. But here we are.
You troll me on camera just as much as you troll me in real life. I love it. But no, it's honestly... It's a fascinating topic to me, and not in terms of just the societal impacts, like how different people perceive it, and just my own relationship with it. Yeah. So it definitely seemed like it would be an interesting topic when you were like, well, what do we even talk about? I'm like, well, this has been something on my mind. Bring it up.
Yeah, I used to listen to a podcast. It's still a great podcast. I just have other ones called Death, Sex, and Money. The things that we don't talk about enough and need to talk about more. And then I hosted the Liberal Lunch Brigade yesterday. And one of the ladies, we were doing introductions, and she said, if it's not sex, money, or politics, why talk about it? I thought that was great.
That's actually a pretty strong quote.
So yeah, what I like this topic. Pornography brings up a lot of feelings in a lot of people, probably most people, one way or another. I think it's really interesting how you have people who talk about how sex positive American culture is and how we're totally beyond any stigma around sex because OnlyFans is a thing and because there is so much pornography. But that just seems totally disconnected from reality. Like, I would love to live in that world.
I would say that those people have never spent any amount of time in the South.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm part of this Facebook group, Social Gals of Huntsville, and somebody was posting about how their husband has a porn addiction, and comment after comment after comment was, porn addiction is real. You know, my husband has the same problem, or I know men who have the same problem, and like it's a huge problem and it's very serious and it's definitely real. And I'm not saying that that's representative of everyone in the group. Obviously, could be that the people, but it is indicative of something that the people who hold that view were the ones commenting.
I'm trying to think. Well, I can just get to the point of why we're ultimately where my mind went
Let's
with
do
it.
it.
So
Let's get to the money shot. The foreplay.
I would say at points in the past, I have had what you would consider problematic usage when it comes to porn. The thing is, I used to consider it's like I thought I was addicted to porn. I think where my mind has gravitated towards now is, yeah, there is such a thing as problematic usage of porn, but I think instead of saying porn addiction, it's more of a problem with how society deals with porn en masse and how basically the shame and judgment that like seems to the stigmatization of it is where the problem is. It's not an actual addiction. It's a problem with dealing with like it's the feelings that society has around it, and dealing with those I think is where the actual problem lies. This has sounded so much better in my head when I was driving and thinking about it, but
And we have talked about this a little bit, but not a whole lot. So a lot of this is like us actually deconstructing this in real time. So, you know, there may be things you don't want to talk about, and that's fine. But I want to say a few things off the bat. One, I am coming at this from the perspective of someone who has made and sold pornography and someone who consumes pornography, but not from the perspective of someone who's ever felt like I've had a like problematic relationship with pornography, and not someone who's been socialized male. So there's going to be a limit to what I can bring from a lived experience perspective to the conversation. But I'm coming at this conversation from the perspective of someone who's read more of the literature that exists than the average person, because I think it's really interesting. And so what I will say is that I am not saying that pornography addiction isn't real, insofar as a person can be addicted to anything pleasurable. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely anything. People are addicted to shopping. They're addicted to work. They're addicted to gambling. They're addicted to food. They're addicted to freaking, whatever. Any pleasurable thing can be addictive to the right person. So again, like, I'm not saying pornography addiction isn't a real thing that happens. Of course it is a real thing that happens. What I'm going to say is, from the literature, there is no evidence. There's no good evidence. The evidence is on the side of the idea that pornography is not addictive in the way that cocaine or even gambling is addictive. It's addictive in the way that work or shopping are addictive, right? It's not inherently particularly addictive. And there's a reason why sex addiction or pornography addiction is not in the DSM-5.
Actually was going to be in the DSM at one point.
But it is not.
So from what I read, for a while I was just curious about, like, okay, what's going on in my brain while I'm looking at this stuff. And so, like, I managed to actually find some channels that approached it from a very, like, I guess, non-personal perspective. Like, it wasn't like the NoFap crowd or anyone. It was just like doctors talking about, like, experiences that they'd had with patients. And from what I gathered, it's kind of, in a way, it's almost like, I'm not drawing any parallels, but it's kind of like, as like ADHD is a blanket thing that, like, has way different, like, a ton of different potential treatment paths. And there was no unanimous, like, essentially it was going to be in the DSM, but there was no, what's the word I'm looking for? Consensus on, like, what the standard treatment practices should be, because, like, it was too broad, and, like, there wasn't a solid agreed upon path for dealing with it.
Well, there's not a solid agreed upon diagnostic criteria either.
Yeah, and I think, but it was something that it was up for going in the DSM, and I think it still is it's still something that's, like, potentially going to be added, but
I doubt it. I mean, maybe. Not if it's added, it will not be on the basis of solid evidence, because the evidence isn't there. It's not solid to support including pornography addiction.
And I guess I would change, like, I said that I don't think it was, like, I was downplaying it as an addiction entirely, I think, when I first talked. But, like, yeah, I do think it has addictive, like, potential. I mean, it is, like, your brain, like, you're getting dopamine reactions. It is like, it can form pathways, like, in your brain if you view it enough. And, like, there's some other chemical releases that it causes. But I think in terms of really problematic behavior, I think it generally comes down to, it's a mix of the actual, like, chemistry aspect of it, heavily reinforced by how society deals with it. That would be a better way of stating that.
Yeah, but again, I don't think that there's not a lot of evidence that it has any impact on the brain that's measurably different than any other pleasurable activity. So, there are studies that claim to show this. They are generally funded by either evangelical groups or groups who make money off of providing quote-unquote treatment and community for people who supposedly have pornography addictions, and they use methodologies that are very open to question. For example, they will often use fMRI studies, and they essentially take this data and interpret it in a way that is not really valid based on the data that they're actually able to collect. So, yeah, I mean, I think what is important is, a person's felt experience with pornography. And I think what I've read is that the best predictor, the other thing that I've read is that for the average consumer of pornography, there is no measurable negative impact on their lives from viewing the pornography. And in fact, people who men, I'm not sure if this is people or men, but at least men who view pornography more often and for longer periods actually tend to have more partnered sex than men who view less pornography for less time, or less often and for less time, which makes sense because different people have different levels of libido. So a person who looks at more porn probably has a higher libido than someone who doesn't. And that what predicts self-reported pornography addiction isn't how often someone looks at porn or how much time they spend looking at porn or how much money they spend on porn. It's how ashamed they are of looking at porn, usually from a religious perspective. So if you want to know if someone thinks that they have a problem with pornography, the question to ask them isn't how much time and money are you spending looking at porn, it's how guilty do you feel about looking at porn.
No, that lines up with a lot of my experiences, honestly. And I think I actually started putting a lot of my thoughts or reconstructing a lot of my thoughts around it when I saw you tweet something about that specifically.
It's also interesting that a lot of the men who claim to have pornography problems often will get shame from their partners around their pornography use, and they'll also get a lot of shame from their therapists. So I read a study of therapists, and it found that the majority of therapists have a very monogamous Christian anti-pornography bent, which makes sense because the majority of the population has this view of sexuality that's very informed by, if not, even if they don't profess Christianity themselves, it's still informed by that view of sexuality. And so, if you go in to your therapist and you say, I think I have a problem with porn, and they come at it from the perspective that looking at porn is bad or wrong, that's obviously going to create a skewed outcome in terms of whether or not you have an actual problem with pornography.
Yeah, because you've generally sought out the therapist yourself, and you've sought them out as a trusted source to weigh what you're experiencing against. And so if they tell you that, that's going to be impactful. Right. Almost, if not equally as impactful as whatever messaging you're receiving from if you're religious. I would imagine those would be two pretty heavy weights to overcome. If both were telling you that you were doing something terrible.
Right. And so I think it makes sense that having read my tweets and talked to me about pornography, it would be a different experience where instead of a partner saying oh, you looking at pornography is bad, you have a partner saying you looking at pornography is neutral. It doesn't mean anything necessarily. It's
that, and also just taking inventory of what those changes in attitude around porn, how it affected usage patterns, guilt, shame, all of that. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is once it wasn't something that was stigmatized in my mind anymore, problematic usage basically just dropped off. It was not something that messed with me mentally anymore. It leveled everything out, I guess, in a way. And it was because it was no longer this evil boogeyman that I had to overcome. It was just this normal, natural thing.
This is something that I really liked about Justin Lehmiller's book, Tell Me What You Want, which is a book about his study of, and it's the largest study of American sexual fantasies ever conducted. And he talks about the white elephant effect, where when you tell someone not to think about a white elephant, all they can do is think about a white elephant. And so when you stigmatize a particular fantasy, in his case, or the consumption of pornography in your case, it makes it a bigger deal than it would otherwise be.
It's you basically the institution or person that is shaming basically achieves the exact opposite of what they wanted to actually achieve.
Right. And when you look at sex, generally speaking, the more it's stigmatized, the less the purpose of stigmatization is supposed to do what? Lead to less sexual assault, lead to fewer unintended pregnancies, lead people to get and stay married longer. I don't know. What else is it supposed to do? Keep women in line, whatever. Every single thing that sexual stigma is supposed to do, it demonstrably fails at, and in fact makes it worse. So sexual stigma leads to more unintended pregnancies. It leads to higher rates of sexual assault. It leads to more STIs. And so I think it would follow then that stigmatizing pornography use would lead to more pornography use.
And it's interesting too that you bring up like therapists is reinforcing that, because I think another shift that helped in my case was also switching to a sex positive therapist.
Right.
Like, and I mean, granted, the guy that I was seeing, he was actually going through graduate level seminary stuff, but I mean, he never was outwardly like judgmental, but like the very few times I brought it up, it seemed like a problem. And also it seemed like something that even he was uncomfortable to really discuss. Ultimately I left or switched therapists because I wanted someone who could like be there to like dissect any problems that we had, but like also I just wasn't getting anything out of therapy with him. Like half the stuff I would say would just be met with silence. It was no longer, I mean, he's a nice guy. It just wasn't a productive relationship. But once I switched to a sex positive therapist, like a lot of stigma that I was holding on to just also seemed to like you like basically like took a sledgehammer to the foundation and then he finished the job essentially.
I love that. Yeah, I think that I grew up obviously in Huntsville, Alabama, Harvest, Alabama, and in the Southern Baptist Church. And, you know, my parents were conservative for the most part, with exceptions. And I grew up in a milieu that was very sexually repressed and repressive. Now, obviously, it's a spectrum, but if we limit the spectrum to the United States of America in the mid 80s and 90s, it was pretty on the far end. And since then, I've met people who grew up in very different circumstances, even in the U.S., who did not get these messages about the right and wrong way to have sex, and who received messaging around sex that centered consent. And for those people, I would say you probably can use whatever therapist you want in terms of sexuality, you know? But for people who are dealing with the negative consequences of having grown up in a sexually controlling, repressive situation, culture, purity culture, then I cannot, I mean, for me, I had to have a poly, kinky, queer friendly therapist. I mean, I have been a sex worker. I am polyamorous. I am queer. Like, and I'm in, you know.
I need someone that you can actually have productive conversations around that with. And that can be hard to find, especially in areas that are still highly evangelical.
Yeah, and I guess if my main problem centered around like money or work, maybe, or, you know, work that isn't sex work, maybe a normal quote unquote therapist would be fine. But no, I mean, I wanted to talk about sex and I wanted to talk about relationships. Yeah. And so I needed someone who I wasn't gonna have to educate about these things, first of all. And second of all, yeah, it was gonna be affirming.
I mean, if you're gonna seek out a therapist, like it's like you said, if it was around very specific issues, and ended up being the case with like, I had some heavy shit that I needed to deal with when I started seeing the first therapist that I ended up switching away from. But it's like, but then I started noticing it's like, okay, well now that I just want to like work on myself in general, it's like, well, okay, there's some things I can bring up, but some things like I can't, or like, even if I do, I'm not going to get any productive use out of this. So like, what's the point of staying with this therapist? Like,
yeah, so I found an affirming, poly, kinky, queer affirming therapist. He referred me to the person I referred you to, who's been really good.
Oh yeah, he's been awesome.
So I highly recommend finding, and you can do that. Their websites, I forget, but if you Google it, or
I was grateful to have referral though, because I don't think I would have known exactly where to start.
yeah. Okay, so I don't know, DM us if you have questions. We'll try to help you, but probably if you Google it, you'll find it. Anyway, I wanted to ask you if you feel comfortable talking about it.
No.
Well, I do. I think I love that we're talking about it because I think we need to destigmatize it, and you can't destigmatize it without talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that the people who are in this whole no fap, all porn is bad mindset, some of them, I think probably most of them are just, I mean, I grew up thinking porn was bad. I remember arguing with my friend about it in college, and her being like, I think it's fine, and me being like, oh no, here are all the reasons it's bad, and I had to email her well into adulthood after I started making porn, or maybe it was before, I don't know, whatever. It was many years later, and be like, you were right, I was wrong.
I feel like I need to send a lot of similar emails, not necessarily about porn, but just like, sorry for encountering me when I was a shitbag in life.
Oh my golly, yeah. Poof. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I just believed what I've been told, and I didn't really question it a lot, and so I think that's where most people are.
Religion takes a very long time to deconstruct.
For
and not
sure.
even like, I mean, you can have healthy expressions of religion. Like, I got pretty close at the end, but still, like, the more judgmental, especially evangelical stuff, takes decades to deconstruct.
And then I think a lot of people who are pushing this viewpoint have certain motives of which they may or may not be consciously aware, even whatever. But it seems like they're the only ones talking about the actual lived experience. Like, if you want to know like what it is to feel like you have a problem with pornography, there are a lot of people talking about it, but they're all coming from the perspective of it's the porn that's the problem.
And even like when I was trying to find like, because like even when I thought I had quote unquote like an addiction, like just finding, I just wanted some like neutral information about like just the brain chemistry side of it, because like it causes dopamine. I take meds because my reward center shot. It was kind of an interesting area to explore. But even finding like neutral content that like there's nothing, there's very, very little on the like pornography is absolutely fine side. And there's, like video upon article upon whatever about like, this is bad. Like you should just like totally cut clean. Like, it was annoying.
Okay. A little bit off topic, but not really. But this is kind of just a thing that I want to rant about, and I haven't really had a place to rant about it. I got really into porn policy for about a year because
I didn't realize how bad it was until you started talking about it.
It's I truly believe that the war on drugs is ramping down and the war on porn is ramping up, because it's not like these people are just going to let people live their lives.
Well,
but
what else are you going to start culture wars over?
Right. But let me tell you, as a person who has I wasn't just an OnlyFans creator. Like, I was top, I don't know, at least 7, I think 6, maybe even 5. I don't know. I was the top OnlyFans creator for a time. And, I am a person who was into sex work and porn policy, followed it. I had a column for AVN writing about porn policy. The people who are against pornography, like as an idea, who want it to be like banned and think that it's like bad inherently, keep talking about the porn lobby. Let me assure you, it does not exist. I very much wanted it to exist. I tried to find it.
I'm actually kind of shocked.
So was I. I
Because-
was shocked.
Talk about a money or an industry that is loaded.
Well, actually,
Used to be.
it used to be far more profitable than it is today.
I mean, that's one of the things. Can I go slightly off topic for like 2 seconds?
Sure.
That's one of the things that always fascinated me about porn, even when I like thought it was a bad thing, was like how foundational they were in like driving a lot of like the infrastructure for the internet that we like use today, because like they basically are why you have like, and it's also, I wonder if the names are somewhat like load balancer. There was some other ones that just sounded blatantly like sexual innuendo, but the reason that it's like you're probably watching this video and like it's streaming very like without any hiccups, hopefully. All that is because like they pioneered video compression, video delivery, transcoding, all of that. But anyway,
Yeah, so a lot of industries will have a large, well organized apparatus around lobbying for legislation, friendly legislation, and managing the PR situation, the public relations situation for the industry players who pay to support that organization. Often there'll be multiple organizations, well, depending. Anyway, whatever, these exist. For the porn industry, this is not a thing.
that is shocking. To
No,
me.
there is no organization that is or there aren't a few organizations who are the mouthpieces for the PR angle for the porn industry. There is no organization I know of that actively lobbies on behalf of the porn industry. There are organizations that exist that operate like around pornography. So there's like Woodhull Foundation. I don't even think that they get porn money, which they should. That advocates for sexual freedom, but that's way I don't even know what they do around porn. It's much bigger than porn. And then there's the First Amendment Foundation, I think. And they obviously like they fight for First Amendment cases, but very low budget. You know, they are definitely not getting any even tiny percentage of the porn industry's money. So there's a Free Speech Coalition. Sorry, First Amendment Foundation might be a different thing. Free Speech Coalition, but again, like very little money, very low budget. Anyway, the porn lobby is not a thing. It should be. I would, if this were my thing, that would be a thing that I worked on. It's not really the thing that I'm focused on anymore. But anyway, anytime somebody talks about the porn lobby, ask them what exactly they're talking about.
Yeah.
Ask them which organizations they're referring to and what their operating budgets are. And then compare that to any other industry and their operating budgets and their staff and their activity. And yeah.
I mean, that kind of also recasts like all the research that like finds that porn isn't really that problematic. Like with a lot of industries, like especially around like climate research, you legitimately have to like dig and see who funded it. But like, if there's not a central lobby funding all this, that kind of makes it seem way more credible.
Oh yeah, and these academics have to deal with so much pushback. They are true believers, at least in getting to the bottom of what the reality is around these questions. So anyway, so I wanted to know about you. So again,
God.
the people who are talking about their lived experience with quote unquote porn addiction, generally speaking, are the kinds of people who, talk about the porn lobby. But yeah, I mean, I would love to know, like, from your perspective, how your experience lined up and doesn't line up with how other people talk about having a quote unquote addiction to pornography.
I would say that my experience lines up a lot with like what other, well, for one, finding people, especially if you're in an evangelical setting, is very hard because like it's so stigmatized and seen as being so shameful that very few people are even willing to open up about it and have serious conversations. And I found a few people, and in some way, it led to some really good conversations, but I think also it was somewhat problematic in that like we reinforced stigma around it to each other. like in the ways that we did talk about it.
I want to break in to just say this is also very variable, because from what I've heard, in my experience, was the opposite, where it's like they talked about it all the time.
Well, you have like, it's talked about like by people who aren't at least indicating that they have a problem with it, but finding people to talk about it with, like as like a shared struggle or whatever. That's where it becomes really hard, because like it's really hard to have honest conversations because it's seen as such a boogeyman.
Yeah, and I think that's also variable, because I think in some instances, in some situations, it's like, oh yeah, I definitely like caved and looked at pornography last night, and it's like a thing that's normalized to talk about. And then I think, yeah, and probably more commonly, it's a thing that is talked about less like, oh, this is a problem I have, and more like a problem we see in the church.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so you talked with a few people, I guess, from your church about your struggles.
Not even from my own church, just like other people that I knew that were also Christian.
Okay, other Christians. And then did you participate or like read the forums where people would talk about their problems?
Very, very rarely.
Okay.
I don't know. Something just felt off about it. I can't entirely explain what.
Well, you know what I honestly think it is? I know I'm interrupting you a lot.
No, I like it because like you're helping kind of direct my thoughts a bit.
I think that there's a layer of like, oh God. There's this meme that I saw about like has enough respect women juice. And I do think that you're like covered in a layer of anti-misogyny, where I think when you read these accounts of these people who who struggle with pornography, even if they're not openly misogynistic or like straightforwardly misogynistic in their posts, their posts are covered in misogyny juice, and it's repellent to people who don't have that kind of deeply embedded misogyny. I think it's also really interesting. This is kind of a side note, but this is from I want to say Dr. David Lay. Yeah. I'm like 90% sure it was Dr. David Lay, Ley. He's amazing. Pointing me to some research on Twitter that showed that one of the biggest predictors of a problem with pornography is narcissistic personality traits.
Huh. Well, that's scary.
It's super interesting. And I don't think that you're high in narcissism at all, but but yeah, I think that you're probably, when you're reading these posts, and probably what repelled you was like A, the narcissism, and B, the misogyny. So anyway,
I would like to think that that's the case. But I would also like to think that I am insanely non-narcissistic or misogynistic. So, which, man, the misogyny thing, yeah, I think that's bullshit. Narcissism thing, and that I'll trust your opinion on.
Anyway, so you can't really compare it to the posts that you read online, because you haven't read a lot of posts online, but you could compare it to your friends. But just talk about it. Like, what did that mean? Like, what was it like what did it look like to have a relationship with pornography that you suspected might be problematic?
I mean, it was a point of shame and guilt, and it's. I think this is the thing, especially after the recent psychedelic experiences that we've shared, that like I've noticed is like it's one of the major things that like my brain was basically screaming to like address is like holding guilt for like stupid reasons will fuck with your life. And like that seemed to like, it was weighing heavily on like the few people that I had conversations with. Like it was impacting them.
I think it's really rough to live in the United States because, and a lot of countries are like, I'm not trying to single out the United States in terms of sexual shame and stigma, but I will say that we get it from the left and the right.
Yeah.
So the right says looking at pornography is sinful, it's bad, it's like a disrespect to your future wife, yada yada.
It's caving to that lust.
It's caving to lust. It's the same as having premarital sex, which is also terrible.
I don't think I ever heard it quite that extreme, but
Lucky duck. But then you get it from the left too, where it's like you're disrespecting women, you're promoting violence against women, you're objectifying women, you're sexualizing women. And I just want to say all that is bullshit. It's ridiculous. First of all, there's no difference between watching pornography and watching anything else. Because what makes something pornography? For some person, looking at a picture of a foot is extremely erotic. For another person, it's not. For one person, looking at boobs is super erotic. For another person, they could take or leave the boobs. So what makes something pornography is purely in the mind of the beholder, first of all. There is no clear-cut definition of pornography. Anything that you could think to differentiate it, there will be exceptions.
that makes sense.
Second of all, there's no evidence that it impacts our brains differently. So there was a huge thing about violent movies and video games in the 80s and how it was going to cause all the kids to be violent, to watch all these violent movies and play these violent video games. And what the research found was that for the vast majority of people, they can tell the difference between fact and fiction. There's no difference between watching a violent movie, reading a violent book, and playing a violent video game. Like, guess what? People can tell the difference between fact and fiction. People can have fantasy worlds. People can understand that they can watch something without acting it out. And there is a tiny portion of the population who are already predisposed to violence, who will tend to watch and consume more violent media, and who that violent media may have a negative impact on. But for the average person, the vast, vast majority of consumers, there's no negative impacts of watching this material. And guess what? Even though the category of pornography is, like I said, a shifting and individual category, they have done studies looking at the impacts of even violent pornography, and it's the same. It has no negative impact on the vast majority of consumers. Again, there is a tiny portion of the population for whom it can be problematic, but they were having problems anyway.
I think just for the sake of being thorough, the only thing that I kept seeing when I was trying to find just like detached views was like there is one chemical that gets released apparently, like especially if you view like several different scenes with several different people in them, it's like your brain basically simulates being with multiple partners, which can have potentially negative impacts, but that I don't remember enough to cite anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an idea that you have a desensitization effect of watching, intense pornography. So if you see pornography that has multiple people, then being with just one person can't arouse you to the same extent. And there's the idea that people ramp up their use. So like if a threesome worked this time, but then to get the same level of arousal, then it has to be violent, and then it has to be even more violent, and then it has to be even crazier. And like that does happen. But again, there's absolutely no evidence that this is a thing that happens to or is a problem for the average user. For the
I wouldn't
vast
say
majority
that
of
was
users.
my case.
Right.
Like,
so these studies will show something that can happen and present it as if it's the default. And that's one of the ways that they skew the conversation in a very anti-empirical way.
honestly, I think the healthiest route would just be, okay, discuss the potential impacts. So like you go in knowing that those are there, but like don't fucking stigmatize, like just blanket say that all porn usage is problematic. Like,
Right.
That seems like it would be a far, far healthier way to deal with pornography. Like, don't stigmatize it. Actually have honest conversations around any potential, like, impacts it has, like, on your brain, but, like, just for the sake of knowing, not, like, judging.
And this is why sexual stigma drives me fucking insane, is that here's the real shit. Watching things is terrible for you. Watching anything is really bad for you. When you look at the data, television use
It's like that book that you were reading.
Yeah. Oh, Bowling Alone? Yeah. Widespread adoption of in-home television destroyed America. That's the TLDR of Bowling Alone. Like, that's why we have polarization, the big sort, why we have loneliness epidemics, why civil institutions are crumbling, why we have all kinds, like brain drain, like all kinds of things come back to television. And from an individual level, when you look at television use, it is positively correlated with obesity, loneliness, ill health, lower income, all kinds of negative impacts of watching television.
Honestly, I feel like the most productive, or the first time that I truly felt productive and like that I was like expanding my like horizons and shit in life was like after I got divorced. I moved into an apartment, and for like probably a good year of the time, I was just like, screw it, I'm not gonna have a TV. And like, so I did not put a TV back up, and like I felt so much like better in terms of just like being mentally well adjusted. Like it made a noticeable impact.
So if you look at the data on watching television and you see that it is, and I want to say it's causal. I know there's a correlation. I'm not sure about causation. But I would bet money that it is causal for a lot of these problems. And you look at pornography and you show no correlation between watching pornography and ill effects for the average person. The only reasonable conclusion to come to is that we should encourage everyone to switch from television to pornography. Okay? If you want a healthier, happier, more unified, less lonely population, watch less TV and more pornography. But
God, honestly, I feel like people would be so much more chill too.
And the only reason that's not the recommendation from public health professionals is stigma around sexuality. So anyway.
And honestly, I feel like people also don't look at the fact that like, I mean, honestly, like most of the time when like I'm looking at porn, it's just because like I have a high sex drive. At a point, not dealing with those like urges becomes problematic on a productive level. So it's just like, I want to get these urges out, move the fuck on. But over time, if you let them build, they won't drive you insane, but like, you ain't going to be as happy.
Your prostate isn't going to be as healthy.
No.
There's, again, also absolutely no evidence. The bulk of the evidence is very much in favor of masturbation and ejaculation. The idea that masturbation and ejaculation it is very, very well established.
I don't think I've ever seen any actual research indicating opposite. I've heard plenty of messaging that says it's the opposite, but any research around that particularly has always been like, no, fucking masturbate.
Fucking masturbate, please. So anyway, okay, you felt guilty about it. And then do you feel like you spent, like, did you spend a lot of time on it? Is that why you felt guilty, or what?
I would say at points that I just lost time to it. And that's honestly why I also thought it was somewhat related to like the dopamine drive. It was like, I don't think it was necessarily the porn. It was just my brain was looking for something to attach to that provided a lot of dopamine, and once I found that, it was just like I went into like a lull state. I don't know. That's why I was looking for like medical research on specific impacts to brain, like your brain and like how it was processed.
I think it's also really important to differentiate pornography addiction and depression.
Yeah, and I don't think I was necessarily depressed. Like there did seem to be correlation with like long periods of like high stress with it for sure, but I don't know if I would say I was ever actually depressed. But I don't think I've ever fully considered that either, so I can't rule it out.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't.
It wasn't a overly like generally like the high usage periods weren't did not line up with particularly happy times.
I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's from my reading of the literature. Whether you want to call it anxiety, depression, disconnection. Yeah, the people who are spending hours a day looking at pornography are not thriving. But again, there's no evidence that the pornography is causing the lack of thriving. It seems much more obvious that they're not thriving for various reasons, and pornography is just...
I would say in my case, it generally lined up when I was stuck in a place, and whether it was my imagination or actually holding fully true, I was stuck in a place where I was limited in how much I could actually get myself out of it quickly. And so it was more of like something to pass the time being stuck in a place, but it wasn't the cause of me being stuck in that place. It was just like something to do to pass the time. There's a better word for that, but I can't think of it.
It was a distraction.
Yeah, so yeah, it was a distraction basically to not go insane.
And I think that that's so interesting looking at the men without work research. So we have in the United States of America for the past, really since 2008, a very large percentage of our prime working age male population, I don't remember what the new term is, but for a while they were calling them NEETs. So not engaged in education, employment, or training.
And to be clear, in this case, I was employed, but I was also heavily self-isolating for various reasons. So I think it was more dealing with the isolation.
Yeah, so these men are living with their parents for the most part. They're isolated in terms of, again, not engaged in employment, education, or training. And they're spending the majority of their days based on time use surveys, playing video games, and watching TV, and a certain amount looking at pornography. Not nearly as much porn as video games, but it's happening.
And video games can be addictive as a ex-streamer.
Oh, for sure. At least as addictive as pornography.
Especially once the pandemic hit.
You talk about an industry. I have not looked, but I'm 99% sure video games is a way bigger industry than pornography.
Oh, especially now that they figured out how to monetize and like do in-app or like mid-game sales of stuff. There's a better name, but this just referred to as like monetization for video gaming.
And there's not a moral panic around video games because there shouldn't be, because video games don't cause men to disconnect.
There are predatory things that should be looked at in terms of like studios basically optimizing their games for being as addictive as possible and like strategically placing ways to get more money out of their consumers. But that's an entirely different that's more of predatory business practices, nothing that actually has to do with like video gaming itself, I feel like.
Yeah, let's table that argument.
It doesn't matter what industry. People are going to find a way to exploit if they're money hungry enough and there's a lack of regulation in certain areas. Conversation for another day.
Anyhoodle, I just think we need to think about why are these men... Again, I don't think video games and pornography are why these men are disconnected. I don't think they're why they're in their mom's basements.
I would say, especially with porn, that's adequate. Or that's not adequate. That's spot on. I don't think it's the cause. I think it's just showing that they're in that. There's just something you're dealing with that state with.
Right. And so for you, since, I mean, again, and if you feel comfortable talking about it, like, since you've reevaluated how you feel about pornography, are you using it less?
Substantially. It's like not a boogeyman. It's not something that's locked into. It's like you were talking about the white elephant.
White elephant.
Yeah, white elephant argument. It's like now that it's just something that is normal, does not have a moral value in my mind associated with it any longer. I mean, there's probably still some latent baggage from like past exposure to like evangelicism. Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, now that it's been defanged, it seems like that in of itself has like dramatically changed my relationship with it.
And I do think that people who feel that they have a problematic relationship with porn have a problem. If you feel like you have a problem, you have a problem. I think where I disagree is whether and to what extent porn is the problem.
I think that's what I was trying to hit on at the very beginning of this episode is, yeah, you have a problem, but the problem isn't what you think it is. It's how you're approaching porn and like what baggage you're carrying into your views of it that are the problem, not the actual porn itself.
It's like masturbation, right? Like masturbation is inherently healthy. It's inherently at least neutral, but no, actually it's pretty healthy.
Seems to be pretty universally considered healthy on a research level. Now, you have people bring in moral shit to that, but that's not research or scientific.
Now, that doesn't mean you as an individual can't have a problem with masturbation. Maybe, hurting yourself physically. Maybe you're disconnecting from people because you're doing it so much. Maybe whatever. You can have a problematic relationship with something inherently healthy. And I think I think pornography is not inherently healthy or unhealthy. I think it's neutral. But you can have a problematic relationship with work, with whatever, shopping, whatever.
I mean, shit, I used being a workaholic for decades to not deal with a lot of shit.
Same,
it's
still do.
Great way to keep yourself occupied and not actually have a...
Love it.
Yeah.
So I think that we do need a treatment protocol for people who have a problematic relationship with pornography. I think step one is destigmatization.
I think that would be a huge, huge step. And also, that was another, just as a random, I swear, random tangent. But a lot of the more neutral YouTube sources that were just like doctors and psychiatrists talking about it, they're like, yeah, for most people, it's like it doesn't really seem to be that problematic. But for a subset of people, like it can actually be incredibly healthy on different levels.
Oh, yeah. Pornography can be super, super helpful, especially if you are not in a situation where you can, talk about things. It can be very useful sex ed. We do not have good sex ed in this country.
No.
It can be very helpful for coming to understand your sexuality, especially if you're not, cis, het, mono. I think pornography can be helpful to facilitate conversations between you and your partner or partners about what you like and don't like. I mean, lots and lots of ways in which porn can be super, super helpful. And I think there's no way to stigmatize or regulate or ban pornography that doesn't end up regulating, stigmatizing, and banning speech and education. And so considering that pornography is neutral and considering that stigmatizing it, regulating it, and banning it bans not just it, but things that are absolutely important and good, the only path forward that makes any sense is to not stigmatize it or try to make it hard to access or illegal.
And also, especially with the more recent state level pornography bans, I think the people that push that are incredibly it's generally people on mostly on the right, generally are pandering to their base, but also have no fucking idea how technology works. Congratulations, you're making, I imagine, NordVPN and whatever the other options are a shit ton of money because all you have to do is connect one, select a different state, And congratulations, the expensive ass stuff you just put into place is completely useless. And that's good. I want that to. I wish they understood that so it could anger them more, because their anger brings me joy.
Anyway, we've been going on for an hour. I enjoyed it.
Was it really fun? Yeah, this is fun.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.